are seeking upward review. The 3% statutory fee accruing to host communities, saying the review has become necessary in view of the present economic realities. Now, the National President, HOSCOM, Dr. Benjamin Tamara Mebi, met the call in Abuja or briefing newsmen, where he noted that the existing 3% had become insignificant due to the prevalent economic realities. Now, you recall that 3% fee is on operating expenses on expenditure OPEX of previous year being remitted to host communities by all companies as stipulated in the Petroleum Industry Act PIA 2021. Now, Tamara Mebi also appealed to the oil companies that had not complied with the HOSCOM regulation to do so immediately to incorporate the Host Communities Development Trust Fund for maximal use. Well, I've been joined in the studio virtually to examine some of these concerns real time and also make conversations around the recent event within the oil sector of Nigeria is an energy expert, Dr. Wisdom Enang. Dr. Wisdom, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good to have you here.
Good to have you, Dr. Wisdom. You're welcome on the show.
All right, Dr. Wisdom.
Appreciate it.
Okay, Dr. Wisdom, the Petroleum Industry Act was designed to address the, issues related to petroleum, industry, and also take care of issues related to host communities. However, the host communities are saying that the 3% of statutory fees set aside to help them is no longer enough. What's your take on this?
Thank you very much. I think for me, before we even talk about whether it's enough or not, we need to talk about, do we have a track record of the level of enforcement? For example, how many companies are even contributing the 3%? That's the first thing that we need to think about.
Okay.
And what have been done with this money? If we're asking whether the 3% is going to be enough, my question is going to be, where is the money coming from? Because we seem to be having, I like to say, an oxymoron on our hands. We're talking about more money to go to the host community. We're talking about less production, which is the source of the money. We're also talking about the fact that Nigeria is looking at for crude-backed loans of $2 billion dollars at the moment, meaning that we are even about to mortgage more of our production for the future. So the question is, holistically, where are we even going to get the money from to be able to pay for the 3%? So this is some of my worries for when I hear these numbers. Level of enforcement, the actual net value, because the 3% is a relative value based on how much spend is even in the industry, and that spend correlates to the amount of production that we have. So the question is, how are we even going to first get more of a net value out of this 3% before we then talk about increasing the percentage? What if, my rhetorical question is, what if you increase to 10%, but that 10% is on a production value that is even worse than 3% of today? So for me, it's not about the percentage, because the percentage is relative. It's all about the absolute value.
Well, Dr. Enang, if I may quickly butt in there, what would you say is the relative consequences of what's been happening within the oil sector when it comes to these 3% that the oil host communities are supposed to be entitled to? How has the current sceneries within the oil sector affected these 3% that they are entitled to, and subsequently the increment that they are seeking for, and the issue of ambiguity of the language of the PIA? A lot of quarters are saying that PIA, the Petroleum Industry Act, is not clear enough for people to really understand what it stipulates and what is the entitlements, clear entitlements of these host communities. Could you break that down for us?
All right, so the host communities, I'm going to mention some of the things that it says. Those talk about the fact that we should earmark 3%, and those 3% will be administered, so to say, by the groups. There are a group of representatives that will be selected by the various host companies. The problem is, you're asking, is there a possibility that the companies that select these representatives may be selected it more in their favor and less in the favor of the host community? And the answer is yes. That's the first thing. The second thing is, how exactly do they calculate? How is it being enforced? Is it being tied to their yearly operational licenses? So that if you do not contribute or haven't shown as having contributed and executed projects, then you will not be able to get new licenses or to be able to renew your licenses. Is that the case? So what exactly is bounding these companies to be able to enforce those provisions? So there's the issue of, how exactly do we ensure enforcement? That is a lacuna in the in the Petroleum Industry Act. Away from enforcement, how do you ensure that it is fair and inclusive? That's another lacuna, because you could enforce it, but if I'm the company and I end up selecting people who are going to represent my interests, then of course what that means is that it's not to the interest of the host community, it is to my own personal interest. So these are some of the nuances that we must understand when we're looking at the Petroleum Industry Act. And of course, without that, then it's just an indicative figure. I'll dare to say, I like to hear companies that have put out this team that are going to administer it, they've put out those funds, and that have actively executed projects. A lot of those things have not happened. So there's policy intentions, there's policy implementations, and there's policy outcome. Across those three channels, the PIA is lacking when it comes to the Petroleum Industry Act host community bill provisions.
All right, Dr. Wisdom, when we started the conversation, we mentioned 3% that the host community are asking for, and you said if the community even have more, you mentioned the fact that we need more money to fund this process. How can we get more money to ensure that we might likely increase from 3% for them?
I mean, the thing is, as I said, what matters is the absolute value, because I'll give you context. 3% of, say, an operating cost of $300,000, for example, that's not to say that's the operating cost, and 5% of an operating cost of $100,000, you're going to find out that 3% of let's say $500,000 or $300,000 is much better. So it's about the absolute value. That's like, I like to look at the devil in the details, end to end. Now, how do we get more money? More production, that will mean more operating costs, and that will mean that the 3% would materialize. And it's all tied up in one thing. So at the end of the day, everything trickles down to the barrels. How much barrels is Nigeria getting? What does that mean for the companies that are drilling and exploring and producing? And what does that mean for the host communities? So if we can enhance our production, what does that mean? We need to be enhancing new frontiers. We need to be increasing our facility reliability to be able to get in more volumes. We need to be doing primary and secondary interventions to be able to get out new volumes. We need to be tackling crude oil theft. Those are all things that we can do to be able to enhance our production. I mean, when we talk about the low-hanging fruit, we're talking about the tackling crude oil theft, and we're asking ourselves, how can we do it? I love to talk about the PDRR method, the predict, the detect, the respond, and recover. What that means is you have a system that predicts whether there's a danger, you have a system that detects that truly it is a danger, and you have a system that responds and recovers the danger situation. And then when you think about all the barriers that needs to be in place for you to make anything work, whether it's enhancing production or attenuating oil theft, all you're thinking about is the people barrier, the equipment barrier, and the process barrier. Those are all the barriers that you need in place, but the most important thing is the people barrier. If you don't get the people to take ownership, they will sabotage the process.
Okay, Dr. Enang, just in 30 minutes, if you could do that for us, please. There are other issues as regards the trust fund, where this 3% is supposed to be paid into for the host communities. Do these monies come straight to the trust fund, or do they pay remitted to the federal government? We need to understand this so we know if these monies, these 3%, truly do get to the host communities. If you could do that very briefly for us.
It is not supposed to go to the federal government. It's meant to be at the trust fund level with decisions executed by members of the trust funds that are set aside by the company to represent the community. And so I'm not aware that it should get to the federal government. It should be domiciled at the local level.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wisdom Enang, for being a part of Niger Delta today. We're really grateful for your opinions on the program.